If you've ever spent any time in, an urban park or near a wetland, you absolutely know the scene. You see a beautiful family of ducks waddling by, maybe some swans gliding on the water, and almost always there's a sign nearby. Sometimes it's a bit firm, sometimes it's polite, but it always says something like, "Please do not feed the wildlife."
It's a real paradox, isn't it? We have this deep-seated human instinct to connect with nature, to interact. And for so many people, the most direct way to do that, the most tangible way, is to offer food. But that one simple act, which is usually done with the best intentions, is becoming more and more controversial.
Exactly. We all see the warnings. The whole "bread is bad for ducks" campaign was huge. We hear about the negative impacts on their welfare, and yet people keep doing it all over the world.
Yeah.
So why? It's easy to just write it off as, I don't know, people being ignorant or maybe just defying the rules, but I suspect it's much, much deeper than that.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. This deep dive is all centered on a really insightful study from the journal Science of the Total Environment. The researchers, they're really honed in on understanding these waterbird feeding behaviors in a very specific place, an urban residential wetland in Melbourne, Australia. It's called Sanctuary Lakes.
So our mission today is to go past just the bread and into the human mind. We want to figure out what really separates the people who feed the birds, the feeders, from those who don't, the non-feeders. Because if we can get to the root beliefs driving this, maybe we can finally figure out how to manage this whole human-wildlife interaction in a way that, actually works.
Yeah. And the need for better management is sure so clear. I mean, sure, sometimes supplementary feeding can have positive goals in conservation, but in cities, the negative outcomes are pretty extensive. We're talking about everything from changing the whole bird community, favoring species that thrive on handouts, to really serious problems with poor nutrition for the animals, and even things like the water quality getting worse from all the uneaten food just rotting away. It's a complex problem from such a simple act.
Okay, so let's get into the hard data. Who are these feeders, and what exactly are they serving up for the local wildlife?
Right. So the study surveyed 206 people, residents and visitors. They defined a feeder as basically anyone who'd fed birds at sanctuary lakes or even anywhere else in the last 2 years.
And what was the breakdown? What percentage of people were feeders?
It was just under a third, so 32.4% fell into that feeder category. But if we look just at the sanctuary lake site itself, the number was a little lower, at 22.9%. What's really important to note here is that for these feeders, this isn't just a one-time thing. On average, they did it over 56 days a year.
56 days. So that's more than once a week on average. That sounds like a pretty significant recurring habit. It's part of their lifestyle, not just a random impulse. Where was this happening?
The locations were split almost evenly. About 42.8% were feeding birds in their own gardens, their private space, and 41.1% were doing it right there in the public space at the lakes. So it really shows the behavior is tied just as much to home as it is to, say, a day out.
Okay, let's talk about the menu. We all have that image in our heads of a kid tearing up a sandwich crust. Was bread really the number one item?
It was, yes. Bread was the big one, accounting for 35.8% of the food. But it wasn't the only thing, not by a long shot. Fruit and vegetables were next at 22.1%, and then came packaged birdseed, which a lot of people think is the healthy option, right behind at 21.9%. They also mentioned things like oats, kitchen scraps, even rice.
That's interesting. That mixed plate suggests there's at least some awareness that maybe plain white bread isn't the best thing. Which leads to a really fascinating question. Why pick that specific food, especially if you've probably seen the warnings?
Well, the motivations they gave are very, very telling. Almost half of them, 48.9%, said they chose the food simply because the birds like it. They're prioritizing what they see as the animal's immediate enjoyment over anything else.
That is such a human way to interpret kindness, isn't it? If they seem to enjoy it, it must be okay.
Precisely. And to make it even more complex, the next reason, given by 36.2%, was that they actually believed the food was healthy for the birds. Only after that did convenience come in, with about 32% saying they chose it because it was just a common food to have in the house.
So there's a powerful cognitive dissonance going on. They might know enough to offer food or seed, but if they're still offering bread, they're either just ignoring the warnings, or they genuinely believe that their little bit of feeding is somehow in the healthy category. They feel good about it.
Exactly. And if we zoom out from the food itself to the act of feeding, like, why do it at all? The data paints an even clearer picture that this is really driven by social connection.
What was the main driver to even do it in the first place?
When they were asked this in an open-ended question, The top answer just flips the whole narrative. It wasn't about the animals. The number one motivation for 41% of them was to entertain children. Then came the desire to help birds at about 30%. And finally, just personal enjoyment at around 14%.
To entertain children. Wow. So for a huge number of people, the duck is it's just a prop.
Yeah.
The real goal is a positive shared family experience. It's a cultural thing, a tradition, and that's so much harder to change than just telling someone bread is bad.
Absolutely. The behavior is fundamentally locked into creating positive memories and social bonding. And that creates a really strong positive feedback loop for the human, which has nothing to do with the actual welfare of the bird.
Okay, let's unpack this for a minute, because before this study, I think a lot of us, maybe even management agencies, we made assumptions about the typical feeder. You might picture someone who's, I don't know, less environmentally aware, maybe older, maybe less educated. But this study really threw all that out the window, didn't it?
It did, in a big way. This is where the research gets really counterintuitive. This study found just overwhelming evidence of no differences between the feeders and the non-feeders across almost all the traditional metrics.
What kind of metrics are we talking about specifically?
Well, they found no significant differences based on age, on gender, education level, employment, whether you owned a pet, or even if you were a long-term resident versus just a visitor. Basically, you can't build a profile of a waterbird feeder here. You can't predict it based on who they are.
That's a huge wake-up call for anyone trying to design a conservation campaign. If you can't target your message based on demographics, you're missing the entire point.
And then came the real aha moment, the thing that goes right to the core of the problem. There was no significant difference in their measured level of connection to nature.
Wait, let's be clear on that. That's a pretty profound claim.
Yeah.
How did they even measure something like connection to nature?
They used a standard psychological instrument. It's called the UCN-12 scale. It basically measures how much a person feels a sense of unity with the natural world, how much they prioritize it. And the key thing is both groups feeders and non-feeders, they both reported a similarly high level of connection to nature.
That is fascinating. So you're saying the person throwing stale bread to a duck cares just as deeply about the environment as the person who is strictly following the do not feed rules.
The data points that way, yes. It means the decision to feed isn't coming from a lack of environmental commitment. It suggests that the people who feed birds are just interpreting their strong connection to nature differently. They see it as an act of providing immediate individual care. They think they're helping that one bird right in front of them.
So they aren't ignoring the facts because they don't care. They're overriding the facts because that immediate personal connection feels more important. They probably think their one little act is the exception to the rule.
Right, it's not a caring deficit, it's a difference in how they express that care. So since it's not about demographics and it's not about environmental commitment, we have to look somewhere else. We have to look at shared beliefs, specifically social norms.
And that brings us to the real deep dive here. What actually matters, the attitudes, and critically, the social rules of the game.
Absolutely. We're moving from the individual to the community. The study looked very closely at social norms, those sort of unwritten rules about what's acceptable in a community. And to really get it, you have to understand the two different types.
Okay, walk us through them, maybe with an easy example.
Sure. So first, you have what are called descriptive norms. This is just your perception of what other people are actually doing. Like, if you walk into an empty movie theater and the floor is covered in popcorn, the descriptive norm is that people make a mess here. You might feel more okay leaving your own box behind.
Got it. And the second type?
That's the injunctive norm. This is your perception of how other people think you should behave. It's about social approval or disapproval. So even if the parking lot is empty, you probably still return your shopping cart because you know that's what people generally approve of. It's the right thing to do.
Okay, so let's start with the most basic attitude from the study.
Right. The fundamental difference, no surprise here, was just in acceptability. Feeders were way more likely to think feeding waterbirds was an acceptable thing to do than non-feeders. But the real power is in those norms.
So tell us about the descriptive norms. What did the feeders think everyone else was doing?
The gap in perception was huge, absolutely massive. Feeders believed that over half of the community, 55.5%, fed waterbirds. Non-feeders, they still overestimated, but they thought it was much less, around 36.7%.
And if we go back to the actual data,
Yeah.
the real number of people feeding birds at sanctuary lakes.
The actual reported rate was only 22.9%.
Wow. Okay, so the average feeder thinks more than double the actual number of people are doing it. That is an enormous misperception. They're operating under this, I don't know, this social delusion that their behavior is totally normal.
And that misperception is incredibly powerful. As humans, we have this deep psychological need to align with what we think is the norm. If I believe 55% of my neighbors are doing this, I feel completely justified. It makes me feel like I'm part of the group, even if a sign says not to.
And this is where it gets really, really compelling. Let's talk about the injunctive norms, the perceived approval, that feeling of whether other people are happy or unhappy with what you're doing.
This split is even more stark. Feeders believed that most people would be relatively happy with them feeding the birds. They gave this perceived happiness a score of 54.1 on the scale. Pretty high.
And the non-feeders?
The complete opposite. Non-feeders believed that most people would be moderately unhappy with the behavior. Their score was way down at 36.3.
The takeaway is just so clear. The difference isn't just about the act itself, it's about whether you feel socially justified. Feeders feel like what they're doing is tolerated, maybe even approved of. Meanwhile, non-feeders feel social pressure to do the right thing.
It creates two completely different social realities in the exact same community. And the current signs, the ones with the facts about bird health, they are basically powerless against that strong internal feeling of social validation.
Which brings us to the big so what? For anyone in conservation management, if the real drivers are these attitudes and beliefs about norms, what does that mean for trying to change the behavior?
It means the current strategy is, well, it's just not enough. Relying on signs that say it's not good for their health or please don't feed wildlife only targets knowledge. But the problem isn't a lack of knowledge or a lack of care. It's a fundamental difference in perceived social acceptability.
So the intervention has to shift. It needs to move from an appeal about health to an appeal about social alignment. How would you even do that?
Well, any behavior change program needs to be enhanced by correcting those descriptive norms. You have to provide clear, visible, compelling information about the actual social reality. That reality is that the vast majority of your neighbors do not feed the waterbirds, and in fact, they disapprove of it.
And that would directly target the overestimation by the feeders. Instead of feeling like they're a part of this silent majority, they're suddenly confronted with the fact that they're an outlier. That's a huge source of social pressure right there.
Exactly. The study really helps us shift the focus away from just individual responsibility, which can make people who already feel connected to nature feel defensive, and move it toward correcting these really critical misperceptions about social norms. That is the key leverage point for making a real change at urban wetlands pretty much anywhere.
This whole deep dive really gives us such a clean, actionable insight. If you want to change how people interact with wildlife, you have to stop focusing on demographics. You have to stop repeating the same welfare facts that people are already overriding with good intentions. You have to start correcting their misperceptions of what their own community thinks is normal and acceptable.
Understanding that dynamic between what we think other people are doing and what they're actually doing, it's such a powerful and underused tool in environmental management. We are social animals. Our decisions are so often driven by what we think everyone else is doing and thinking.
Which raises a really important question for you, the listener. Given the strong evidence that we base our behavior on these perceived norms, how could we update that standard sign we see everywhere? That simple, please do not feed the wildlife sign. How could you change it to leverage these social norms?
You'd have to make the silent majority visible, make their disapproval and non-participation clear. So instead of just a health warning, imagine a sign designed to fix that descriptive norm. What if the sign read something like, protect our birds. 9 out of 10 of your sanctuary lakes, neighbors choose not to feed the waterbirds. Join them in keeping our wildlife wild. That doesn't just ask you to stop. It tells you what almost everyone else in your community is already doing.
A fascinating thought to leave you with. Sometimes the most effective tool we have for managing the environment isn't a fact about nature, but a simple, compelling fact about ourselves.